Hey everyone, welcome to our fifth student panel. We are talking about networking today. And as you can see, we have five students from pretty much all over the world. We are going to talk about networking in recruiting, but I was just alerted by Julian that networking is also a crucial component in getting into business school. So I'm going to ask him some questions about that as well. Networking was a pretty alien concept for me coming into business school. I just didn't know that you had to like ask people for jobs. I just thought you apply and just happens magically. But we're gonna learn more about that. We have again five panelists. I'm gonna go around the room for them to introduce themselves to all of you. So before you introduce yourself, I'd love to know three things. What were you doing before going to business school? One reason on why you chose this specific business school in particular, and finally, what are you planning to do after? So Andres, why don't you start us off and then we'll go clockwise.
Sure. So prior to business school, I worked for 5 years in investment bank, and then I did 3 years entrepreneurship, leading my family's business in Central America. And I came to Haas because I really liked the culture, and I felt like out of all the business schools, I just really connected with the people there. Post MBA, I'm looking to move into entertainment, so nothing, something that's completely unrelated to anything that I've ever done. So that was the point of business school, and that's what networking became very useful.
Awesome. Hendrik, do you want to go next?
Yeah, no problem. So hi, Hendrik de Ruyter. So before Stern, I was working in financial services at AllianceBernstein in New York City. Came to Stern. I think a big reason was I had a background in finance and interested in learning more about finance. So I was drawn to Stern's finance background, and I also wanted to stay in New York City. So that was a big driver for me too. So this summer, actually working at came to school, was interested in learning about fintech, went through consulting recruiting, actually didn't get an offer, which was unfortunate, and then re-recruited in the spring, and now working for a search fund this summer. So had plenty of experience talking about different types of networking.
Awesome. Also, just so you know, we are trying out a new voting system for the comments. One thing that I learned is that there's a ton of people, a ton of comments. There's no way for me to get to all of them. So if you want to get your comments for the panel, submit your questions in that voting link, and I'll pick out the most popular comments. But while that's done, Julian, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Hi, yes. So prior to business school, I worked in retail for a bit at Target headquarters, and then I kind of networked myself into doing management consulting primarily for the military. So I worked with Army, Navy, Air Force, and then for about the last 18 months, directly with the Marine Corps. Came into business school, so I'm currently at Wharton now. One of the reasons why I decided to go to Wharton was because I went to a very small high school and college with like 200 to 400 people for a graduating class. So I wanted to experience a larger learning environment. And with Wharton having such a large graduating class, I thought it would be a challenge from just like a social and environmental perspective.
Right.
But outside of that, wanted to go to business school in order to transition careers. And so originally thought I was going to go into consumer goods over the summer and then post business school. But after networking and talking to a variety of different people, kind of got exposed to other opportunities and other industries. And so this summer I'm interning at American Express in one of their marketing business units, and I'm planning to, fill it out and then see, what post MBA has to bring.
Awesome. Kaylee, you're up.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kaylee Laxer. Before my MBA, I did 2 degrees in genetics, and I was very science-based. Ended up working in pharmaceuticals, transitioned to a more business-oriented role, and decided it was time to go back to business school. One of the main reasons I picked Rotman was because they have something called the Self-Development Lab and the Leadership Development Lab, which really focuses on some of the parts of yourself that aren't just education focused and really creating a business leader. That really spoke to me. After my MBA, I'm going to be working at Bain. I'm actually doing my summer there. One of the reasons I'm wearing all black today is because today is Juneteenth. It's a really important day in history. It's the day that slavery was abolished in the U.S. And with Bain, we spent the day working through workshops, anti-racism movements. So wearing black in solidarity for that black community. I'm actually going to be joining them full-time after graduation as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Kaylee. Emric, you're next.
Hi, everyone. So I actually have no background in business whatsoever. I worked for the U.S. government for the first 10 years of my professional life. I flew for the Air Force for a couple of years first, and then moved up into the space program and was a spacecraft engineer and operator for GPS. So fairly technical background. I ended up deciding to go to HEC Paris because it's in Europe, in Paris. So this was an opportunity for me to kind of live abroad, and the school offers an incredible amount of international diversity. So being able to see how, business and leadership and things like that are taught in a different kind of environment outside of the US. What I hope to do, probably something more in strategy. I'm looking to pivot away from the aerospace industry, but as my networking experience has taught me, if you are an expert already in a certain field, traditionally you'll have an easier time being able to kind of make connections and interact with others. So still unclear on what the future holds right now, but yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Got it. So stepping onto the first networking question, I guess Emric mentioned that networking was a pretty different concept. The same thing happened to me, by the way. But a lot of you who have sort of had worked in general North America before have had some experience networking to get jobs. But would love to know, how was networking in business school different from any networking you may have done in the past? So I'm going to start with Andres and then maybe take responses from Julian, because he mentioned consulting, getting into management consulting involved a pretty bit of networking by itself. So how was business school different? Andres, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, what was different is this time around, it was way more intentional. You know, I had a clear goal in mind in terms of industry. And so I was very strategic in terms of who I talked to find out really what type of role I want to do within the industry. Because even though, like, for example, I know I want to work in entertainment, but there's 1,000 different functions. So, you have to talk to a variety of different people to see what really fits with you or what you're interested in. There's way too many people to talk to and companies. And so I think that was very useful, because you just don't have enough time to talk to everybody.
Right.
So I think that for me was what was a little different this time around.
What about you, Julian? Was business school networking different at all?
Yeah, I would kind of piggyback off what Andres had mentioned. I think what is challenging with business school when it comes to looking for a new job, especially as a career switcher, is that there's so many opportunities out there that are available. It can definitely become challenging to focus on, what you came to business school to achieve without kind of getting distracted by what's happening around you, while also trying to keep an open mind. And so, with there being so many opportunities, networking is really essential in terms of just educating you on, what these different roles may entail, both during the internship and post-graduation. And so I think just in general, just like being able to manage all the variety of different opportunities that's going around definitely requires you to like really be intentional about your networking, as opposed to maybe when you're already out in the market.
Got it. Yeah, no, I think I totally agree. I think networking almost becomes like a curricular thing in business school, like something that you do every single day. So questions for networking newbies. I consider myself one of those. So when you were networking to get a job or to even get an interview, what were some of the things that you took, like some practical steps? I'm going to start with Emric and Hendrik and Kaylee. So Emric, why don't you start us off, because you mentioned networking was new to you. So what were some of the things that you had to do that you had just not done before?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind when you're networking and it's a new environment is being prepared when you're going into the networking session. So you might get an opportunity to be in a room with a bunch of company representatives. So doing your research before, making sure that you at least have a little bit of background on who you might be bumping into. So when you have those opportunities, when you get to rub elbows with someone, you're prepared that you know about their firm, and if there is an opportunity there that you're interested in, that you're ready to ask for it.
Awesome. Did you have similar experience, Emmerich? What did you think?
Yeah, I definitely completely agree with the idea of it almost like when you're not used to networking, it almost kind of feels like an interview in and of itself instead of because it kind of feels transactional for the new person like I was. You feel like you're walking in kind of like expecting maybe some sort of result. But once you kind of get over that first initial kind of moment, really what it was it's an opportunity also, like Hendrik said, once you know a little bit about the company, it kind of opens doors into being able to see if that company is a fit for you, right? Like the way they describe their presence at the company, the way they behave, the way they have their Friday afternoons or things like that, the company culture. And I think that when you do your research, it kind of gives you that credibility to help those employees that are there to talk to you, really, because it is in a sense transactional. They're looking also for future employees to kind of get the feel of whether or not you're a right fit for them. So yeah, the research part I definitely agree with, and I think it's on my personal side, it was really just trying to get over that mental block of like I said, transactional feeling where you're kind of asking for something, but you're not. Like it becomes kind of this ritual dance. So once you get over that weird initial feeling for the first timer, it becomes an entertaining process where you can really ask questions about how you fit in the future.
Kaylee, same question for you, but I also would love to know, because you recruited consulting, so at least within that domain, what really constitutes networking? Are there emails, lunches, coffee chats, phone calls? So what all things that you did that you thought sort of, fell under the purview of networking?
So I think anything can fall under the umbrella of networking, and I think especially within consulting and the MBA in general, it's an opportunity to learn. So for me, it was approaching those situations with genuine curiosity, like genuinely trying to figure out if that's the right place for me, if that's the right role for me. And anytime you're having those conversations with someone, whether it be one of your peers in the MBA or someone in industry, I think that would be constituted as networking. You're trying to make connections, but you're also just trying to learn and genuinely find out if you fit there.
Awesome. So getting questions from people which are sort of voted in. So networking seems to be something that people who are generally open to talking to strangers and open to talking to who have sort of drive energy, also known as extroverted people, are generally natural at. So if you're not one of those people, and I don't consider myself one of that tribe, what do you do if you're introverted, if you hate talking to new people, or if you would push having to call someone that you don't know forever till you absolutely have to? So how do you get there? Andres, let's start with you.
Yeah, it's an interesting process because I hate networking. Much like Emmerich was saying, like it's just, first of all, I'm an international student, so coming to America and learning about the ways that networking is done in America is different for me. So I just didn't like the feeling. It didn't come natural to me. But I think that echoing a little bit what Kaylee was saying, like if you're genuinely curious, then you'll come up with interesting questions. And the more you do it, the more reps you get into it, the easier it'll become to get over that hump. And you'll start just really finding ways to connect with people more organically and sort of get over that whole transactional feeling of it.
Right. Hendrik, do you want to add to that? And if you're not sort of the introverted type, and I also think you can hate networking even if you're not introverted. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what can get a little bit intimidating about networking is, and maybe something that can help you overcome, is that not every networking interaction is going to be that perfect connection where you meet someone and you just hit it off and you make that instant connection. I think a lot of networking is trying and failing, and you meet someone and it just doesn't really seem like it's a fit, or it doesn't work out. And I think the key then is just keep pushing, because you never know when you run into someone that you just, for whatever reason, that connection happens and the conversation flows. And what is most likely there is those people that you connect with are the people that you're going to want to work with, and for whatever reason are probably the firms that are good fits for you. So I think it's not great advice if you are introverted just to get out there and try, but it is where there's a lot of value in going and trying to meet people, and you never know who you're going to click with.
Yeah, I totally agree. And also, like, I think it sounds worse than it is, because I think once you sort of get into the zone of talking to people you don't know, you sort of get better at it. I don't know. I felt like my networking endeavors towards the end of my first semester or my second semester were so much better than my cold stuff at the beginning, where I felt like a fish out of the water. Awesome. So Emmerich, question for you, because you just almost finishing your first year and stepping on to your second, when did you actually start networking for jobs or for interviews? When did that process actually start for you?
So it's interesting because, like, I guess it links back to the previous question, but for me, networking is one of those daunting tasks at first, and I think this is where being in an MBA kind of gives you this safe space, I would almost call it, to learn how to network. So for me, it started, I would argue, probably towards the end of the first semester, where I had finally gotten used to going to a couple career fairs where the school really provides those opportunities to learn how to network and gives you that easy way to start up a conversation, right? Because otherwise you have to also learn how to initiate the conversation, which can be a little awkward if you're trying to do it by email or LinkedIn or something like that. So for me, it was really the end of the first semester, and then second semester, obviously with the pandemic, things kind of changed, but really, once we got towards the middle of the second semester, we were kind of in a rhythm where I kind of understood the procedures of how to get in touch with employees and other career centers and figure out what's next for the summer internship opportunities. Like that.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think things have been very different for you guys because it's been slightly different to network not being in person, which I think makes it easy for some people, but makes it really challenging for some other people. So I'm not sure how you manage that, but kudos for that. A different question that I faced in my other panel is that sometimes for networking or to build relationship, you have to learn these like really obscure things. Like I'm an international student, or I was, I'm not a student anymore. But and I have had no inclination to sports of any kind. I just think the whole idea of grown people chasing a ball is kind of ridiculous. But I was completely alone in my assessment of sports in Michigan because the University of Michigan is deeply, deeply a football-driven school. And I sort of attempted to learn football, and I'm just like, it's not worth it. Like, if I can't get a job without having to learn this, I don't deserve that job anyway. But I did do some other stuff, like I would throw myself in conversations and I would learn stuff to be able to talk about them. It sounds superficial, but it's actually helpful. But any examples of any of you having to learn something really strange just so that you can talk about it? It was football for me, but anything else that jumps out? I'm waiting for any of you to unmute yourself, or I'll just cold call. I'm cool with that. I've been cold called for 2 years. This is my chance.
I guess for this one. So again, for me, networking is not just about industry. It's also about the people in your program. And obviously I'm up in Canada, so maybe it's a little different for me. But right. I'm really proud that Rotman's a very, very multicultural, ethnically diverse business school. And so throughout the year, we're learning, we have actual sessions where we're learning about different cultures and how to work and operate with them, and just learning about where they're from and their histories and their food and their entertainment and everything. So I think that was an important part of me learning to network within my actual business school peers.
Right. No, I think Canada also sort of gives you the opportunity to be even more diverse, if I'm not wrong. So I think that definitely helps as well. So Hendrik, did you have to learn anything new to network with all the recruiters, or were you all good?
I think one thing that comes to mind when I was attending consulting recruiting events, and it's kind of funny when I think back to it now, but we had a session where you have the presentation, and then all the recruiters are standing around the room, and the consultants are in the room, and all the MBAs make these kind of half circles cornering the members of the firm around, and there was all these rules around how to approach a circle and proper etiquette in terms of cutting in and cutting out. So I think and they're common sense things, but they're kind of funny thinking back now. And one of the things you were learning in business school was how to approach a circle of people and try and make an introduction.
Yeah, it's also really crazy because one thing that I learned is that you always approach or you stay in a circle with a half drink, so that if you want to get out, you can always like drink it and it's like, oh, I'm gonna like get one more water or whatever beverage. It's pretty crazy. But no, that's good to know, because circle of death, I think a lot of people call it. It's one of the things that people are really bad at, or they struggle with at the beginning, and it sort of gets better. But let's talk a few circles of death experiences. So as Hendrik mentioned, it's exactly what it is. So after a general presentation, there'd be 10 or 12 or maybe a little bit more people from a firm, and about 100, 200 people who are interested in that job. We sort of start huddling around them. It's funny. It's almost dystopian, but I'd love to know what your experience was with Circle of Death. Andres, have you been on any of those circles, either in person or Zoom?
Too many of them, actually. Yeah, I went to a couple of consulting networking events, and there's a lot of Circle of Deaths because there's like 50 people interested in consulting and only like 6 representatives from the company, right? So it's like 10 people around. But I think that a great practice is always to keep in mind is that there's opportunities for you to step up and ask questions, but also you have to know when it's time to sort of step back and allow other people to take the floor.
Yeah.
Just so that it becomes more conversational, and also you learn from the other questions that people have, because they might have come up with questions that you weren't really thinking about. And so I think that the worst you can do is try to dominate the entire conversation.
Right. Oh, I have some domination stories too, but it's really funny to watch people from a distance. Like I would come to Circle of Death even when I had a job, just to like watch other people. It was really funny. Julian, question for you. How do you prioritize networking? Because you mentioned you switched your career through business school, and I'm guessing you had plenty of opportunities to go for many of these events. How did you decide to say yes to an event and no to a few others?
It's really just based on like, is there a specific company or role that I'm targeting? So like if I'm going to a career fair, for example, which can be overwhelming with a variety of Circle of Deaths, you kind of want to go in there with a plan, have an understanding of where the companies are and who are the people you want to talk to. So again, you don't get overwhelmed and distracted by everything else that's going on. And I really try to just, again, be intentional about what type of information am I looking for? Like for me, throughout the recruiting process, like things like culture and like how do people deliver feedback? What is work-life balance like? Those are things that are really important to me. So I was making sure that I was asking about things that I valued, and not necessarily things that just like generic questions like, oh, what type of work do you do? I mean, while that is important, but some of those things you can kind of find on the internet. And so just like, again, having a plan and making sure that I'm, again, not getting distracted by, all the other noise is how I kind of like prioritize where I wanted to focus.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think one thing that I learned, and I think you get better with your questions as you like ask and reflect on your questions. I think one thing that I learned is people do love to talk about themselves, but maybe, just maybe, people don't love to talk about their work all the time. I think a lot of these second year or like very recent consulting managers who came to at least Ross, I think this is like their getaway from their job, right? And I felt like a lot of us were asking the same questions over and over again. So what kind of engagement are you in right now? Or what kind of staffing model do you follow? So it becomes really rehearsed, and there's like really very little personal touch to these questions. So would love to understand how your questions or your networking interrogation, if you will, evolved with time. So Emric, would love to know, because you seem to have done a fair bit. Kaylee, would love to know from you as well. So Emric, do you want to start first?
Sure. Yeah. So I kind of did something similar to what Julian was doing, where at first I would ask the typical questions like, oh, what do you do? What is the company's role? Kind of staying focused on the company until I moved into what was important to me, which is primarily the work-life balance, and figuring out, like, asking people to tell me stories about their life. Like, for example, they'd say, oh, we have like this many weeks of vacation, and in Europe they have a lot more than in the US. So as a result, it opens up opportunities to hear about what they do also on the outside of work, like, oh, they go fishing or sailing or whatever. And as a result, it kind of creates a tighter bond. And as Kaylee suggested, it's more interpersonal than just a professional thing. So for me, it transitioned from being pure professional, give me the stuff that's on the website, bullet point format, to, hey, tell me about yourself, and see if you and I even have similar interests. Because if you play football, I'm kind of like you. I have no interest, so maybe not the right company for me.
Right. No, I like you already. Kaylee, thoughts?
Yeah, I guess at first I was also a little stiff in those networking sessions, and you go to so many in business school that you learn to start tailoring the conversations. I started to have fun with them, talk about interesting topics, especially because I was interested in consulting. That's a really easy thing. People work on such interesting and cool random projects. That's an easy thing to talk about. And I think the biggest growth was me learning that I can just walk out of a circle of death. Like if I'm in a circle of death, you can just say, oh, I got to go fill my drink and leave. So I think that was from start to end. And also just having friends in those networking sessions are the best, because you can kind of give each other a nod and kind of save each other from those situations, or bring each other in when it's a really good conversation.
So one thing that I felt I was doing wrong at the beginning was I was trying to talk to too many people. And like, for example, if I was, so we did a Microsoft office, I was recruiting for tech, and we did a Microsoft office visit, and Microsoft has just so many rosters, it was ridiculous. So, and then I had the option to talk to like 20 people. So do I talk to 20 people? Do I talk to one or two and actually make a connection? Well, making a connection to one or two was just such a better experience than it's like a buffet, or sort of trying to pick or pecker a small conversation with a ton of people. So I felt that was a more effective strategy for me, and I think you guys had a lot of really cool strategy as well. So I want to move away from networking to get a job, but also networking to get your second or your third job. And you guys are not there yet, but business, there's some crazy stat that like over 89% of people change their jobs within like first 10 months or something. I still don't understand that stat, but I think must make some sense. So how does your school or your class, have you seen leverage some of the networking value even outside of business school? And I fully understand that you haven't had to do that yet, but would love to know examples that you have seen or that you've heard. That would be great. Andres, haven't heard from you in a while. So let's start with you. And if anybody has any thought, just go on unmute and I would know.
Yeah, I think that, at least at Haas, and I think that pretty much every business school does it. There's a ton of alumni events that happen all the time, especially now with Zoom. There's virtual events that are connecting people throughout the country and across the world. And so I think those become very important in sort of also not only meeting people, current students, but also alumni and what they're doing in their respective industries. I've seen a ton of Haas alums also leverage LinkedIn just for internship search or whatnot. So technology has really aided to enhance that connectivity when you move post grad school.
Right. Would love to know any other thoughts. Hendrik, did you want to add something? and rep Stern for a little bit?
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of stuff Andrew said. Like, I think especially now, like, it's unfortunate that a lot of our stuff had to go virtual, but it does open a lot of doors where people are open to, instead of setting a coffee chat with someone in California that you may never get to speak to, like now you can set up a Zoom meeting and it's not a big deal. So I think, and for me, my summer internship came from a firm that two Stern people started, and I got in touch with them through the Stern alumni network. So it's just, it has been like, even as a student and still going through the process, it's very easy to reach out to alumni and leverage the school name, and people are normally at least open to having some sort of conversation just based off that, which is very nice.
Right. And I see a lot of schools have had very strict alumni structures in place for exactly things like these. I think at Ross, one of the things that we learned is to include Go Blue in the subject line, and that makes responses easier for some reason. But Julian, would love to know about structures at Wharton that you have seen or have heard stories about of people leveraging the network in way after they've done graduating from business school?
I'm trying to think. So I do remember I was in a strategic brand management course this past semester, and we had an alum who started a kind of like food startup, like selling kind of like Caribbean style beans. And I remember he did mention how he leveraged both like because he started in his General Mills network, and then also his Wharton network to kind of just get an understanding of the food, a better understanding, not necessarily of the food industry, but like entrepreneurship and kind of like starting, like building his own startup, and then also trying to being able to get funding from the school even as an alumni. And so I think that's one example of like, alumni being able to still use school resources and then leveraging his colleagues in order to get his business off the ground. And then I also helped plan a conference back in December that was attended by prospective students, current students, and alumni. And so that was a really interesting environment to see so many different kind of like generations of like Wharton graduates in one space, to see how they interacted and kind of were able to come in this common space just on like their business school experience.
Right. Yeah, no, I think those are really, really cool example. And especially for startups, it becomes so much more important to sort of lean in on the network that you have already built, because you're sort of creating that from scratch. That's nice. It's a great example. Quick question about a hypothetical. If networking wasn't such a big part of business school recruiting, do you think you would have been better off? And I'll ask everybody this question. Andres, I'll start with you first and go clockwise.
I don't think so, because like some of the other panelists have mentioned, a lot of it is just educating yourself. You come to business school and you have all these hypotheses of potential career paths that you may have. And it's really when talking to people that you become more educated about actually what is a fit for you, the company culture, job function, or whatever it is. And so it's not just about getting the job. It's about also like figuring out whether you want the job in the first place.
Yeah.
So I think that's where networking has really aided me in sort of, narrow my career path and have a clearer vision of what I want to do post MBA.
Awesome. No, I totally agree. Hendrik, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you can only get so much information off the website, and especially when you're really diving into a company and somewhere that you might commit your career to, you really want to be able to dive lower than the information that the marketing team is putting out to you. So I don't think you get that until you speak to people that are actually in the roles that you're going to be doing, and hopefully through networking and you make a genuine connection, you can get some really good insight into what your life's going to be like.
Julian, do you agree?
Yeah, I don't want to repeat what they said, but I definitely agree.
Sure.
I think one thing to mention about networking is networking doesn't always have to be about like getting a job. You can genuinely want to get to know somebody. Like I have a lot of prospective students and enrolling students who have been reaching out to me at Wharton, just asking me questions about my experience, but also just wanting to get to know me because, especially in this virtual world. And I wanted to say another thing that's really valuable about networking is like it's not always about what somebody can do for you, but also what value add can you provide for them as well, because it should be a reciprocal relationship and not always take.
Yeah, no, totally. I think I sort of saw that as well. I think networking sort of led to led to longer relationships, and it didn't seem to just abruptly end at an acceptance or a rejection. It sort of kept going. Kaylee, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, just reiterating the same points. I think a lot of the benefits come from learning about the industry and learning if you're fit there. I think even back to your earlier question, I think that benefits the introverts as well, because if you're comfortable talking to someone when you're not normally, you really just start to learn more about what you're looking for and where you fit.
Emmerich, thoughts?
If networking was not something that was expected, I think I'd be a little bit happier. And I think it's just because there's a really thick gray line between what networking is and mentorship is, because I fully agree with what Julian is saying. But for me, networking still has by now this connotation that it is some sort of business transaction-ish type of thing, where you are not just learning about the company, but you're trying to see how you fit with them and how they fit with you, kind of thing, versus if there was no networking required and you were just trying to learn more about the company, that would be more on the mentorship side of things, where you can really just have that discussion about trying to figure out more information about the company more than seeing how you fit in with them as well. But having those interactions, however you want to call it, is definitely invaluable, and I completely agree with what the others are saying.
Awesome. No, I understand what you're saying though. Like if networking did not involve like a positive recruitment outcome, then maybe you would seek those interactions out more genuinely. No, I get that. I sort of understand it. So I want to leave the audience with a piece of advice from each of you, if that's okay. So if you had to redo everything all over again, and you're sort of back to being a first-year MBA, what would you do differently? And this doesn't have to be networking related. It can be pretty much anything, but what would you do differently? And I'll start reverse. So Emmerich, I'll let you go first, and then we can end with Andres.
So for me, it was primarily two phases. First, accepting that networking is a part of the business school environment. And the second one was being able to take advantage of my classmates who maybe came from environments where they are very used to networking. And again, taking advantage of the fact that we are in a business school wherever we are in the world. And so this is like the perfect environment for you to just practice those skills. Maybe I could have taken that timeline that we discussed earlier from like mid-second semester to move it back up a little bit more to be a comfortable networker by the end of the first semester, kind of thing. So right. Using the fellow classmates that you have around you, who are usually going to be pretty excited to teach you and show you that they have an edge over you, kind of thing. That would have been the one thing I would have changed on that.
What's your hindsight, Kaylee?
I tried to do this as much as possible, but I think going back, like this MBA goes really, really fast.
Yeah.
And you never know when a global pandemic's going to send you locked up inside your house. So just try to enjoy as much of it as you can. Like, it's hard. There are scary things you have to do. You're going to have to work hard. You're going to be disappointed if you don't get your first choice and stuff. But like, you meet amazing people in that experience, and just try and lap up every moment before it goes by.
What about you, Julian?
Business school is challenging, and one thing I kind of wish I would have done was kind of just like express some of the challenges that I was going through with some of my peers, because oftentimes like we feel like we're going through these these challenges alone when like the things that I was feeling, a lot of my peers were feeling as well, and it just kind of like helped alleviate some of the stress. So just like being open and vulnerable about, you know, what's going on and what's on your mind is something that I wish I would have done earlier in the business school experience, because it definitely just would have helped me feel like less siloed when it came to certain roadblocks that I was hitting.
Right. No, that's good advice. What about you, Hendrik? What would you have done differently?
Well, I think a helpful piece of advice now is that and especially with all the talk around networking, I think it's a lot easier to network when you don't necessarily have to. So that time, like where there's a lot of pressure first semester to go and network, but you know, eventually as you go through the summer and you have an internship, just to try and keep that muscle memory strong. So to continue your outreach throughout your entire time in school is something that I'm hoping to do myself. And I think a good piece of advice to just, it's a lot easier to reach out to people, you know, if you have an internship already, and then you're reaching out just to stay in touch. And I think you make more genuine connections that way, that, you know, you never know how things are going to lead.
Andres, what about you?
I'd say that probably what I did differently is just come into the experience with a clear vision of what my priorities were. I think the MBA is an exercise of learning how to ruthlessly prioritize, simply because there's way too much stuff going on. Like there's academics, there's social stuff, there's networking, there's case competitions. You just don't have enough time to do all of it. And so when push comes to shove and you're deciding whether to study for a test or go to that networking event with that very interesting alumni you want to meet, you know, that'll make life easier for you into deciding how to allocate your time throughout the experience.
Right. Yeah, prioritizing, tough. Awesome. So this was great. And again, thank you guys so much for joining. I know all of you are in the middle of your summer internships and whatnot. So and Zoom makes everything slightly a bit more complicated, but thank you so much for joining and spending the time with us. This was great. Networking is something that everybody really is worried about, and everybody wants to do it, but nobody really wants to start it. So just makes life a little bit easier knowing people have done it before, have done it well, have struggled and overcame. So thank you so much for joining. This was a great 40 minutes.
Thank you. Happy I was able to join.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.